Okay, so when you give your answers, you just have to provide at least 3 sentences. Okay, that's the minimum. Sometimes 2 sentences is enough as long as it is 2 long sentences. But to the extent that you're going to have 3 long paragraphs in your answers in one question alone, that's already very dangerous. Okay. The more you speak, the more errors there could be, the more inconsistencies. So we have to refrain from that. Okay. That's why you have to give your answers as brief as possible. Okay. In fact, there's a rule that there is strength in brevity. Brevity. Okay, so if you have short answers, and as long as it is able to hit the question, it is responsive to the query of your examiner, then you're good to go. Okay, there's no need for you to further emphasize everything. Okay, you can't tell everything to the examiner because you only have a limited time. Okay, if you force to tell the examiner everything, then that's also a danger zone. Okay, so please control yourself so that your fluency might not be affected. All right, so any hesitation is content related. So for you to get a 7 at least for the fluency, then make sure that if there are hesitations, it's about the topic itself. It's about the question, but not about your grammar or your vocabulary. Because if that's the case, then that's really going to be a markdown on your end. Aside from that, you also have develop. You need to develop fully topic fully and appropriately. Okay, so make sure that you have a full coverage of what is being asked. So don't just choose. Okay, you need to be able to give the quantity of the answers. Okay, what is being required from the question? Okay, that you have to achieve that and give that to your examiner. You give what is due to your examiner. Speaks at length without noticeable effort or loss of coherence. So yes, it's definitely okay for you to use lengthy answers, but make sure that along the way you are not lost or you will not be lost. That's the danger if you keep on giving lengthy answers, long answers, because it can be that number one, or it can be either that you will forget the questions. Okay, and that's the worst thing possible that could ever happen while answering the questions. Or it can be that um, you will be off topic. Okay, you will be off topic along the way because you don't know where you have stopped, or you don't know how to restart, how to reboot what you have started talking about. Okay, so that's the danger about it. So let's proceed. For fluency, you have to use also a range of connectives and discourse markers with some flexibility. So this is where your transition gets in. You have to use linking devices. Okay, but your cohesive devices need not to be very formal. Like it's not necessary for you to use furthermore, moreover. Okay, that's very formal. That's for the writing. You can just use aside from that, also, not to mention, things like those. Okay, you don't need to overemphasize and overuse those formal connectives because that's intended for the writing. But for the speaking, just use the casual terms. Okay, conversational terms. So that's it for the fluency. Now the second criterion is your pronunciation. Okay, first question. Do you need to have an accent in your examination? When you do your speaking subtest, is there a need for an accent? Do I need to imitate a British native? Do I need to have an American accent? Do I need to sound like Australian? Or can I just be Pinoy when I speak? Well, of course, we have nothing against our accent, but Filipino accent is a strong accent. Okay, it's a strong accent, especially for us, Bisaya. accent. It's a very strong accent. What else? There are a lot of languages, okay, across the world that are quite strong. So you have to avoid that. Okay, as much as possible, you can use British, American, or just neutral. The neutral accent is American accent. Okay, so if you want to know how you can neutralize your accent, then you can watch YouTube videos or any resources that could help you. Unfortunately, we do not have a separate class for that. That's already beyond our job description. We do not teach accents. Okay, here in Niner, we do not teach accents. But you can do it on your own. You can maximize the internet resources available. Okay, and do your own research, how you can neutralize certain words so that you can use that during your actual exam. Okay, so pronunciation, there should be a usage of a full or wide range of pronunciation features. So that includes the modulation, your diction, okay, what else? The emphasis, the phrasing, the tone. So those are the features that you have to employ while speaking. And make sure that these things are used precisely, okay? But not to the point that they are forced. That's why here you have with precision and subtlety, okay? Meaning, it should be natural. It should not be forced. It should not be mechanical. Otherwise, that's also a markdown for the pronunciation. It defeats the purpose of you using those. Okay. And the next you need to sustain flexible use of features throughout, but this is also possible. It's possible for you to get 7 even if there are occasional lapses. So that's permissible. Okay. Is effortless to understand. So you don't need to exert much effort so that the other person can understand what you're trying to put across. Okay. So by just your mere delivery, even without much non-verbal like gestures, the other person can understand what you are trying to talk about. Okay. Accent has minimal effect on intelligibility. Okay, your accent is really not, it doesn't bear much. Okay, although it's an advantage, but it's not also a markdown. If if your accent is not really that good, it's not necessarily a markdown on your part. Okay, especially for the pronunciation. That's a common misconception. So you don't need to force an accent. Okay, just be natural. Whatever accents would work best for you, you use that during your exam. And let me just emphasize this, intelligibility. Remember, intelligibility is not part of your requirement for you to get a 7 or 9 or 8 or even 6 for the speaking. Okay, intelligibility is just a plus. It's just a plus factor, but okay, it's not the means of you getting at least 7. Okay, it's just a plus factor, but it's not the ultimate means for you to get 7. Because in the IELTS speaking, veracity or intelligence is not a measurement of how proficient you are in English. Okay? So please do not mistaken the IELTS speaking as you need to be very intelligent. No. Even if you are just of average intelligence, you are still very much capable to pass and even get as high as 9 in the speaking. Next, lexical resource and vocabulary. So this is a strategic criterion because once you are good in the vocabulary, then there's a tendency that your fluency also will be pulled up. This is the good thing with the LRV. Okay, because if you have the right vocabularies, then definitely you can ace your answering of the questions. You can impress the examiners. Not just impress, but first and foremost, you can catch the attention of the examiner because the examiner heard the correct words that he has been looking for. Words that are music to his or her ears. So that's the goal. You need to use vocabularies that are within the preference of the examiners, or vocabularies that are within the expectations of the person before you. Okay, that's why you have to use vocabulary with flexibility and precision in all of the topics. Okay, you have to be precise, it should be accurate. You cannot just use a vocabulary without even considering the context. You always have to reassess, am I using the correct word? Okay, so this is the rule, the 100% rule. Okay, and I hope that you will be using that in your actual exam. If you are not 100% sure of the meaning of the word, then don't say it. Don't use it. Just look for another word, a simple term, okay, in substitution for that particular word that you are confused of. Okay, so please, again, if even if you're just 95% sure, still the 5% there is the 5% margin of error is still very significant. That's still crucial. So it's better that you refrain from using words that you are not 100% sure. Okay, so that's the safest thing that you can do for you not to have several markdowns in your LRV. Okay, another one is you have to use less common and idiomatic vocabulary skillfully with occasional inaccuracies. So if you know what idioms are, these are very useful. These are useful lexics, okay? Because it catches the attention and it adds up creativity to your speaking. Okay, you can't be boring, you can't be plain, okay, you can't be austere when you speak. You have to be as lively, especially if the topic is something positive. You have to be as enthusiastic as you can. Okay, and one way is to use idiomatic expressions. All right. So please join our vocabulary classes so that you can have a knowledge of what those vocabs are and how are you going to use them in a sentence. Use paraphrases effectively is required. So in your questions, try not to parrot those. You have to paraphrase. For example, where do you live? So don't say I live in, because that is very common. Aside from it's very common, you're just merely copying the question. You're not generating your own words. You're not showing off your vocabulary. Okay, so you need to be able to use those words intentionally. Okay, you have to flaunt those words that you have in mind. And of course, there's nothing to pour. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You can't give what you don't have. So you have to memorize as early as now many vocabularies. You have to have yourself well acquainted with different topic specific vocabularies. Not just only the simple terms, but even the idiomatic expressions, okay, adjectives, and the likes, anything that can really be of great help for you to have a leverage in your LRV. Okay, so specifically, you have to use idioms, phrasal verbs, collocations, topic specific, and simple but varied words. Okay, let me give an example. For idioms, for example, you would like to say that this something or this thing would be useful in the future. Let's say, suppose that you're referring to your notes, okay, your notes in the IELTS today, you taking down notes. Okay, so you can perhaps say that these notes will come in handy. Okay, come will come in handy. Okay, when I will go to a different university, something like that. So when you say come in handy, meaning it is going to be useful in the future. It may not be useful today, but someday it will. So that's the meaning of come in handy. Or if you will be asked, what do you do for a living? Okay, what do you do for a living? So instead of saying that I am working as a blah blah blah, which is very generic, you can just say my bread and butter is teaching, for example. Okay, so when you say bread and butter, meaning that's your occupation, that is your means of livelihood, it's your source of income. Okay, so those kind of things. And it adds creativity to your speaking. Okay, so please don't hesitate. And um starting tonight, you have to collect, or maybe tomorrow you can collect idiomatic expressions, okay, for that purpose. Or if you don't have time, then you just attend the classes for vocabulary, or you can personally message me for that. Okay, now for phrasal verbs, these are also good terms. Okay, good and less common terms, but these are very very simple. Phrasal verbs are so simple. Okay. For example, if um, phrasal verb, the form of the phrasal verb is, it is your verb plus the preposition. The verb, the action word, plus your preposition. For example, uh, do over, do over. Do is the verb, over is the preposition. So that's very simple. That's the format of how you're going to write the phrasal verb. So do over, two words, but they have the same meaning. Okay, do over, it takes a singular meaning, which means repeat. Okay, you have to do it again. Do over. So instead of saying do it again, why not say do over? Okay, do it over. And it's less common. And the impact is greater compared to just saying repeat. Okay, it's very generic. Okay, next, collocations. Okay, so we have a separate class for this. So just wait for our vocabulary class for the collocations. Topic specific, of course. You need to have a mind map of words that would be very appropriate for the topic. Okay. And lastly, simple but varied words. It's totally okay for you to use simple terms as long as these are not repetitive. These are not overused. Okay. In fact, if you have used a word in one question, don't use it again in the second question. So if possible, you can use it probably in the fifth question or in the next part of your speaking. Okay. So that's how you're going to do it. So that's it for the LRV, your lexical resource and vocabulary. And the next, grammatical range and accuracy. So here you have to use a range of structures naturally, appropriately, and flexibly. Okay, so there are different structures like compound sentence, simple, of course. You have the simple sentence, compound sentence, complex sentence, and compound complex sentences. So in your speaking, you have to use and show off those different structures. Although predominantly, you will really be using the simple sentences. Majority of your sentences should be simple. Okay, and then the rest should be at least complex or compound, okay, or compound complex, right? So you try to research those things in advance, although we have an individualized lecture for that during our grammar class, but you can do a research in advance, okay, so that you can relate to these things that I'm talking about, right? So let's proceed next. Yeah, you have to produce error-free sentences with occasional inappropriacies. Right, so that's very self-explanatory. And lastly, you need to use your tenses, prepositions, your subject-verb agreement, and other basic grammar correctly. So if you want to have good scores in your GRA, for you to be accurate and for you to show off your range, please attend our grammar classes. These classes would come in handy. Okay, these classes are of great help for you to ace your examination. Okay, so those are the four categories. You have the fluency, the pronunciation, your lexical resource and vocabulary, and then your grammar, grammatical range, and accuracy. So I hope that you memorize that. Okay. So as to the parts, there are three. Okay. You have the part one, part two, and then the part three. So the part one is basically the interview and warm up. Okay. Part two is a 2 minute speech, and the last part is a two-way discussion. Okay, so for the part one, you will be spending most likely 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, four the minimum, five the maximum, and it's an interview type, so there will be personal questions, and the examiner also is going to follow up, especially if you were not able to answer the questions, or if there are certain loopholes or things that you have not fully covered, okay, in the questions. But again, that is to the discretion of the examiner. There are those that they would just really, they're just they just want to have follow-up questions. Maybe because they want to push you to your limits. Okay, so that's normal. That's normal. Of course, the job of your examiner is to push you to your limit. That's one way for them to gauge how really good you are in your English, how flexible you can be in your English, okay, and how you master you are in your usage of the words, your vocabulary, the grammar, and everything. Okay, the part one also consists of the general questions, okay, and this is the least important part. Apparently, this is the least important part because, again, this is just the interview one. Interview type only. Of course, for interview, you have already anticipated what those questions are. And I suppose that you have even encountered most of these questions when you applied for your job. Like, what is your name? Where are you from? How old are you? What are your interests? Something like that. Okay, so that's very common. And of course, you can definitely answer those questions. Okay, those are no-brainer questions. So therefore, the expectation of the examiner in the part one is high. But it doesn't mean that the expectation is high, the bearing of part one is also high. No. Compared to the parts two and three, part one has a lesser bearing. Because the examiner knows already that you have prepared much for the part one. You are very ready to answer those questions because these are personal questions. And probably you have already encountered that before. Okay. Now, the part two is this one is a critical part of your speaking. It's just a description, but it's difficult in the sense that you only have a minute for the preparation. And 2 minutes, you need to have 2 minutes for the delivery of your answers. Therefore, there will be no follow up questions from the examiner. It's all you who is going to speak all throughout the part two. Okay. The topics, however, are relatable, so that's not a problem, especially if you have the application. Okay. And there are sub questions. So the format is you will be given a main topic. For example, describe your dream house. And after that, there will be sub questions, subsequent questions. Okay. And these are usually the WH. What, when, why, how, where. Okay. That's why these are just very relatable. In fact, these are personal topics. But the thing there is, the problem there is, how can you sustain? How are you going to sustain the 2 minute speech? Or um, can you even shorten your speech? Because there are those people who are very lengthy when it comes to their delivery of speech. Maybe because they're very talkative, that's why they cannot control or regulate their time. But there are also those that who speak less. There are those who speak less. That's why they cannot sustain until the second minute. So that's the challenge. Okay. That's the challenge in the part two. But still, it's very doable. Okay. Next, for the part three, 5 minutes. Okay. It's 5 minutes and then general questions with follow up questions. Intelligibility here is a plus factor. Why? Because again, these are general questions. So if you are familiar with a wide range of topics, if you are a reader, okay, if you're into news, then this is advantageous on your part. Okay. But if you're not, don't worry because you still, again, you have the application. So you have the very resource. You have the resource to ace your exam for this subtest. And this is the most crucial part because this is the most difficult. So this is where your speaking will really be tested. Okay, so if you're able to pull off your part three, then there's a high chance of you getting seven and even higher than that. Right. So avoid these things. Avoid parroting the question. Okay. Don't repeat the question. So what is your name? Don't say my name is. That's parroting. So why not say I am? Okay. Repetitive words. So please avoid using overused words. Okay. Using the word very. Okay. So you have also to refrain from using very. We have a vocabulary class for this, or you can ask me personally for the handout if you cannot attend. Okay. Fillers. So these are the unnecessary words. The only time that you will use fillers is when you have no choice. Okay. When you already have no choice. Like, it's better to use fillers than to have long pauses. Fillers are like the so, that, or what else? Those kind of things. Okay. Those are examples of fillers. Those words that have no bearing or no meaning at all. So those are fillers. But it's, again, it's better to use fillers than to have long pauses. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you're gonna use them all the time. You can just use them minimally. Okay, seldom. Right. Slangs, of course, you know what slangs are. Informal terms or those that are only acceptable in the Philippines. Okay, or street terms. Street terms also you have that, and Pinoy terms. For example, uh the word scotch tape. Scotch tape is a Pinoy term. So if you want to be universal, okay, you have to use a universal language. You have to be global, even in your usage of words. So instead of saying scotch tape, why not say adhesive tape? Okay. What else? Chit. CHIT. The one that the bill that you're paying if you're going to dine in a restaurant. So we call that chit, right? But universally, we call that a restaurant bill. Okay. So those kind of things. And we also have a class for this, the common Pinoy mistakes. So you better attend as many vocabulary classes as possible. Speaking too fast, okay. This is also something that we have to avoid. So tip, when you speak, don't speak too fast, especially when you are still starting. So even if how well acquainted you are with the topic or with the question, don't be overwhelmed because that's the enemy. That's your enemy. If you get overwhelmed, then there's a tendency that along the way you will be catching your breath and your mind is going to catch up with your mouth. So your mouth is already functioning too fast than your brain. So that is going to be a problem. Okay. So avoid speaking too fast. Just moderately, okay? Just have a moderate speed. In fact, if you're still starting your speech or your answers, you can be slow. Okay, you can take as much time as possible. And once you already have the words, the ideas, you already have the confidence, and that's the time that you can speed up. Okay, so it's not all the time that you have to speak too fast, especially if you're still buffering and if that topic is something that you are not knowledgeable about. Okay, speaking before thinking, of course, you have to think first before you speak. Okay, that's a cliche, but that's also applicable to your speaking. Don't let your mouth function first before your brain does. Okay? So it should always be the brain and then your mouth follows. Okay. Changing answers. So please be consistent when it comes to your delivery of the response to those questions. Asking questions, so don't, if your examiner will ask you, how are you today? Or how do you feel today? And then you will say, I'm fine, thank you. How about you? So never ever do that. Don't ever ask questions to the examiner. The only question that you're allowed to ask them is, can you please repeat the question? Or would you mind if I would have you repeat the question? So that's the only time that you can ask them questions. So that's for clarifications purposes, for clarification purposes only. Okay, but other than that, please never ever ask questions. Initiating the handshaking, yes, this is also not advisable when you already face the examiner. Never ever initiate the handshaking. You have to wait that the examiner is going to extend his or her hands to you. So that's the only time that you are going to shake hands with that examiner. Slouching, of course, you have to be in your proper gesture. Don't make those unnecessary slouching because it also implies something that's a non-verbal expression. It seems like you're uninterested or it seems like you're lazy. So that's also a factor and it could tell a lot about you. And it might even be a factor of you getting below 7. So please don't slouch. Okay. Frowning. In your examination, you need to keep a positive vibe all throughout. So avoid frowning. Make sure that you are smiling all the time. If the topics are quite serious, then you can just have a neutral face. But if the topics are positive, it's lively, then you have to be enthusiastic, okay? Or too loud or tiny voice. So you need to learn how to modulate your voice, okay? Eating the words. So this happens especially if you don't drink enough water, okay? Because sometimes there are certain things that are clogging your throat or your nose, okay? So if you have problems with those, then it's better that you drink a lot of water. Okay. And of course, you sleep well because it's also a factor. If you're sleep deprived, it will affect your speech. Definitely, it will affect your speech. So you consider that sleep well and have your breakfast and drink adequate amount of water. Okay. Bluffing or making up stories. So I do not encourage you to make up stories. Okay, be honest. Honesty is the best policy. And the examiner will really catch you if ever, okay? If you're inconsistent with your answers, then that's already an indicator that you're not sure or you're just making up stories. So please avoid that. Inconsistent answers, that's very explanatory. One line answers. So please try to have 3 sentences. Okay, at least 3 sentences. Okay, using unnecessary gestures and movements. So these are, I guess you know already what these gestures are, especially those that would cover your face. Okay, and those that are not pleasing to the eyes of your examiner or those that are disrespectful. Okay, being too animated, of course you have to be enthusiastic, but not to the point that you are too animated, like you have a lot of movements. Okay, you're not having a declamation there, you're not orating before your examiner, you're just speaking, okay, but not to the point that you will be using those kind of movements that are not even necessary. Memorize answers. All of this is least likely to happen. Okay, it's hard to memorize answers. Okay. Offensive or profane words. So don't use abusive words, anything that are not respectful. Okay. Arguing or debating. So this is a problem for those who are smart or those who are really into debate because they have a tendency to debate with their examiner. Okay, this is just merely a conversation. Okay, it's just a friendly conversation with your examiner. So consider your examiner as if you are debating with him or her. It's very bad. Okay. Not maintaining eye contact, so you should be able to look at the examiner on an eye level all the time. Okay, so if there are times that you would like to look at the sides, it's okay, but occasional. Okay, occasional. And proper dress. Okay, so you need to wear the proper dress codes. So it's just enough for you to have a semi-formal, okay, or a business attire, or even just a casual attire, as long as it's not revealing. Okay, especially for the girls, don't wear something that would um catch the eyes of your examiner, especially if that is a boy. Okay. Same thing also with the boys. Don't wear something that is revealing or not pleasing to the eyes. Okay. Being monotonous, plain, and boring. Okay, so you have to give life when you give your answers. Okay. So if you're monotonous, or if you consider yourself like you are monotonous, you're plain and boring, then it's better that you watch videos or have an inspiration. Someone who is very lively, enthusiastic, and who really gives life when he or she speaks. Okay. So you need to have an inspiration. Addressing the examiner sir or ma'am. So this is no longer necessary. So and every time that you answer the question, there's no need for you to say sir, ma'am, or say what is your name? I am Blanche, ma'am. I am Blanche, sir. Okay, there's no need for you to address them. Don't be too polite in your speaking. Okay, you just have to simply address them with nothing. Okay, no titles. Okay, don't use them doctors, ma'ams, teachers, or even examiner. Don't say examiner or Mr. Examiner. Okay. Digressing from the topic. So this is when you are off topic, when you are not responsive to the question. And this is very common. Avoid that, please. Always asking the examiner to repeat the question. Okay, it's all right for you to have clarifications. But if you keep on having clarifications, if you keep on asking the examiner what the question was or what's the meaning of the question was, then that's already a problem, especially if that's chronic. So please, please, please refrain from doing that. And being arrogant, domineering, overconfident, and complacent. So these are the attitudes that you have to do away from showing. Okay. Don't be arrogant. Don't be domineering. Don't be overconfident and complacent. Okay. So just be humble. You need to be inferior because you are really inferior. You are subject to the judgment of your examiner. The examiner will give you the score, it's not you. So you have to be humble all the time. Okay? You need to accept that you are inferior, but not to the point that you will lose your confidence. No, not to that extent. You're inferior in the sense that you are being graded by the person before you. Okay? And don't be overconfident. This is a problem also for those people who know very well the topic, who are intelligent, or who are genius. Okay, please be humble all the time, because sometimes even if you are so good in answering the questions, if your attitude is not good, then there's a tendency that the examiner is really going to give you a 6.5. Remember, there is still a degree of subjectivity in your speaking. There is still a human factor. So consider that. You need to take that into account. So don't be overconfident, right? Also, being shy. So anything extreme is not good. Okay? Anything extreme is not good. So don't be too shy. Don't be too timid and rigid. Okay? So you have to make some movements, okay, some creativity. You need to add some life and colors when you speak. Don't be so plain. Okay? And then lastly, avoid going to the examination unprepared. So if you are reviewing now, don't take the exam at the drop of the hat, meaning immediately, especially if you have not yet studied or prepared. Okay? Not unless if your target score is just 4 or 5, then it's definitely okay for you to take your exam even without having a review. But for those who are aiming for 7, 6.5, please don't feed yourself to a den of lions. You have to be prepared. You need to be fully equipped. Okay, you need to have the full armor for you, okay, for you to defeat your enemies, which is the examiner. Well, actually, yourself is your greatest enemy when you take your exam. It's not the examiner. It's not even your co-examinees, but it's you yourself. So yourself is your greatest opponent, especially for the writing. So you have to defeat that, not just during the exam, but even as early as now. Okay, so I guess that's it for the speaking. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you have learned something. Okay. And should you have any questions, then don't hesitate to message me personally, okay, through my messenger. So that's all for tonight. Thank you so much and see you again.